Hey everyone, and welcome back to Untethering Shame. I'm your host, Kyira Wackett, and today's episode is one that asks us to slow down and take a closer look at the energy we carry, the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, and how those things shape the lives we're living. In this rich and layered conversation, I sit down with Veronica Weedon to explore shame, codependence, and the law of attraction. We talk about how our energetic frequency, shaped by childhood experiences, internalized beliefs, and the stories we tell ourselves, impacts the people and experiences we attract. But more than that, we look at how we can reclaim our responsibility, raise our vibration, and create space for something new, even when that requires letting go of the familiar. Veronica brings a grounded and deeply compassionate lens to this work, challenging the oversimplified ways the law of attraction is often presented, and instead offering a path rooted in responsibility, healing, and choice. We unpack the difference between empathy and compassion, the fear of the unknown, the roles we play in dysfunctional systems, and the power of mindset work, mindfulness, and hypnotherapy as tools for transformation. Before we dive in, let me tell you a little bit about Veronica. Veronica is a holistic health coach, rapid transformation therapy practitioner, hypnotherapist, and the founder of Revival Health GmbH, a practice that helps people move towards healthier relationships and a better life. After years of doing her own healing work, Veronica now supports clients in uncovering the root causes of their destructive patterns, reforming their beliefs, and transforming their relationships and lives by addressing health on an emotional, mental, and physical level. This episode is an invitation to reflect, realign, and reimagine what's possible when we stop outsourcing our worth and start doing the work to come home to ourselves. And with that, let's dive in. I'm so excited for this episode today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I feel like this happens a lot where I think listeners know this by now. Typically, I'll have, whether I know the person or not coming in, I do these like pre-chats, getting people together. We kind of talk through what do we want to talk about. Oftentimes what I find is that the conversation I have with people is usually we aren't going to have a problem filling the time. It's going to be a matter of how do we not talk for 7 hours. And I feel like when you and I met, it was just the epitome of that example. I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel like we could talk about this stuff forever. And so to say that I woke up this morning sort of vibrating with like a really high, like, oh my gosh, excitement energy is just, it's an understatement. I think this is going to be so cool.
Oh, I love that so much. And especially that you just mentioned the word vibrating with high energy, because that's what we're going to talk about. So.
I know. Well, and it's interesting too, just to be thinking about that. And well, I like to start every episode doing basically just a one-word check-in. Oftentimes, I think from the therapist side, it's just helping people get in touch with where they're at emotionally or kind of checking in that moment. But it was interesting because as I thought about doing this question today, I'm like, oh gosh, where am I at energy-wise and how am I vibrating? And I think because of what we're talking about. And so I'm curious for you, either using an emotion word, a frequency word, whatever you want, how would you describe how you're feeling right now coming into this session?
Excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I just love talking about the subject, and the conversations have never not been fun and interesting and challenging and exciting. So yeah, I'm just excited.
Yeah, me too. I definitely, again, that like high vibration piece that I felt. And I think it's that element too of knowing sometimes when, especially if the conversations are about a really hard topic or really painful topic, it feels weird to say that I'm excited to have those conversations. But I think a big part of it is also when you get, I was going to say on the phone, well, on the computer, on the opposite side of Riverside with somebody else. And you're like, okay, I know this person on the other side is showing up and we're going to go deep in a conversation. There's an excitement there because I think there is this commitment to vulnerability and exploration that we often don't get to see in our day-to-day lives, which is so important. Okay. So I want to think about many people that are listening to this, they've saw the title. They're like, oh, the law of attraction. And I think we've all heard this. We've heard attraction, particularly, I think we think a lot about romantic partnerships, the attraction in terms of kind of what we bring into our lives. But if you could just sort of give a general overview when we say the law of attraction and we're thinking about this, what do you mean and why do we need to be talking about it?
When I talk about the law of attraction, I am talking about everything in our lives. So not just romantic partnerships, although as you mentioned already, of course, that's the first thing that most people jump to for obvious reasons, because the romantic relationship in our life is often a very, very big part, if not the biggest part or piece of our life outside of ourselves. So it makes sense. But when I talk about the law of attraction, what we're really talking about is energy, energetic frequencies. So everything in the world is energy. This is old news. This is not woo-woo. This is not
right. It's science.
This is, I mean, Einstein and Tesla, and they all talked about it. So this is old news that everything is energy. And we humans and everything around us, we're all made of the same stuff, right? We're all atoms. So we vibrate at a certain frequency. That's what energy does, or energetic waves, and we give off a certain frequency. And the law of attraction states that we attract back the same frequency or a very similar frequency to what we are giving out. So essentially, the world around us and our experiences are a mirror to our own internal vibration. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the idea being, well, first I was thinking about when you're in a state of like how we are, this sort of energy that we're feeling, we're naturally going to be bringing in people around us or attracting interactions, even just situations and experiences that feel that same excitement, high energy, versus if I wake up and I'm like, my day is shit, everything is hard, I feel very kind of low energy. My brain also jumped to, oh gosh, I really want to talk through, okay, so then what happens in our day-to-day flow? And then also I was like, oh my gosh, trauma. Like immediately I went there and I was like, wait, that's like 10 steps too far ahead. Yeah. So I'm just going to say it so we can both go there. But
okay.
Yeah.
Well, so here's what I'd say to that. So where we place our attention, we place our energy. And this is why our thoughts and our mindset, this is why, mindset, again, it's such a popular topic right now. And there's a reason for that. It's good that it's popular because our thoughts are very important, because thoughts form our beliefs. A belief is just a thought that you think over and over and over again. That creates a belief, and our beliefs inform our behaviors, which then in turn influence our thoughts. So it's a loop, it's a cycle, if you will. And where we place our attention or where we place our focus, we place our energy. So going back to the frequency and what we're emitting. So to reference what you just said, if you wake up and you go, oh, I just feel shit today, and it's a bad day and it's raining and everything's awful, that's where your focus is, and therefore that's where your energy is, and the frequency of it at which you vibrate will be much lower compared to if you wake up and go, oh my goodness, the sun is shining, I feel great, I had such a good sleep, I feel amazing, today's going to be a great day. That's a different level. And so what you experience then throughout the day is very likely to be very different in those two scenarios. And this applies, on a day-to-day basis, but then of course in our lives at a greater scale. And I understand that this can be very triggering for a lot of people. And I say that because it was for me too, when I first came into the subject and topic, thinking, well, when great things happen, we all like to think, yeah, I did that, I manifested that, and my energy was good, and that's why I experienced it. But when negative things happen, especially trauma and really terrible things or illnesses or events, experiences, then nobody wants to acknowledge or admit or accept, I created this as well. We like to think we're the creators of our own reality and the power that gives us when everything's roses. But when things go bad, the obvious thing is, well, I would never want that. I would never create that. Of course I wouldn't. But here's the thing, and this is an important part of it all. we are the creators of our own reality. And that means everything. And so the law of attraction doesn't make exceptions for you or for me, or it is what it is. And therefore that means everything, the good and the bad.
Well, it's interesting because I think what happens is sort of two sides. So one, I think a lot of people that work on the mindset side and do the quick fixes. So I think about people publishing the 5 steps to feel better about this, or the 6 things you can do, and you're going to have the healthiest boundaries at work. And oftentimes behavior change alone doesn't work. And we know that, kind of going back to your cycle, if your beliefs are ultimately, I'm not worth these things, or I don't believe these things about myself, your behaviors, even if you change them in the short term, are inevitably going to get back to a reflection of your beliefs.
Makes me think of New Year's resolutions that are short-lived, right?
Exactly. And because those resolutions are externally motivated, I'm supposed to lose weight. I'm supposed to do these things. I should look this way. And that all is rooted to shame, because you are not good enough unless you lose the weight, you change your job, you do whatever. So they're very, as opposed to values driven, internally driven, they're very externally driven, which is really kind of giving your power away. I think a lot of the times the reason, I guess I'll just speak to me, but I'm assuming this is a very common experience where I've rejected conversations I think about energy and mindset, is sometimes I think it feels like people use it as an oversimplification to then basically say, so then everything that happens is in your control and you just have to smile and tell yourself it's going to be fine. And I don't often think that's the intention, but it is the perception, because they try to oversimplify it. And so I think what you're saying is essentially there's still things that are going to happen outside of our control. I didn't manifest the ice storm that took out our power for 2 weeks. Like, I don't have that much control and power. That happened to me. And the response that I had and the energy that I had, my husband and I went through the exact same experiences. I have a much more vigilant response. I have a history of trauma. My brain and body naturally goes to a very different energetic frequency than his does. So he's able to see we don't have power. Here's what we can do. And he is able to sort of manifest a state of calm that reflects in our life, and things feel different than if I'm taking the lead, which is we should all duck and cover and get in a corner in the basement because there's probably going to be a tree that falls on our house, and everybody around me starts to panic. And so I think what you're describing is that, which is sometimes people might introduce the concept a little too early. You might be really raw in your trauma, really raw, and you just got a diagnosis. And there is a truth in the fact that how you code that information and how you respond to that information, you are in control of. And the subsequent dominoes that fall really are within your realm to change and to control. So when you are in this, well, everything sucks, the world is terrible, you are the designer or the author or the creator, whatever you want to say, of that reality, because the piece that happened after X incident is yours to decide. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I've got so many thoughts happening at the same time in response to like the various pieces of everything that you just said. So first of all, with the oversimplification of it. So to that, I would say it is actually a simple concept, but that doesn't mean it's easy to implement. Yeah. So conceptually, sure, change your mindset, right, etc., and then things will get better. It's a simple concept,
right?
But then the triggers that come from that, often people equate simple with easy. And so that is where I would say it is simple. The concept is very simple. Everybody can understand it. But the implementation of it is most definitely not easy for most people. Some it is, but for not.
Yeah.
And to the events that occur, it's not the events that happen in our life. It's how we view them.
Right.
We don't see things how they are. We see them how we are based on our experiences. And this then creates our responses to them. And to your point of the various reactions and, your response to you compared to yours to your husband, because you've lived very different lives and have very different experiences. And therefore for him to change his mindset might be a lot easier, right? For you to change yours, because like anything, changing our mindset, it's creating a new habit. Shifting our focus is creating a new habit. And we all know a habit doesn't happen from one day to the next. It takes time, it takes commitment, it takes practice, it takes dedication. And this is the same with pretty much everything. But it does start with two things. It starts with a choice to change, because everybody wants change of some sort, but very few people are willing to change. So the first step is a choice. I will change, right? My circumstances I will change. So, and with that then comes the responsibility. So it's taking responsibility, saying, I will change. So no matter what your situation is, and I'll speak from my experience again, because I've been triggered by all these subjects when I was early on in it. I had about a decade. So a decade of trauma from my sort of, in a nutshell, my brother being killed to being sued. People came like for money around that whole trauma. For 6 years of that, I was in a highly narcissistically abusive relationship for the 6 years. I was dumped at the altar. My grandmother died. My mother died. It was just the decade of my life just felt like a domino effect of disasters. My health was in the dumps. I had back surgery. I had brain seizures. I was dying from every perspective to the point where I no longer wanted to live. And so if someone came to me and said, focus on the positive, be grateful for what you have, let me tell you, I would want to punch them in the face so quickly that they wouldn't know what hit them. I didn't. I had that much sort of self-control left. But that's when sort of toxic positivity and toxic gratitude comes in. And so I want to be sure to let people know and understand there's a difference. Because when you're in a situation like that, if you're in just dire circumstances, or you're just out of a really abusive relationship, or you've just had a trauma, or you're really struggling with an illness, compare it to a freight train going 100 miles an hour into one direction, and it's the wrong direction, right? It's the direction you don't want to be going in. But the law of attraction means we are going to attract more and more and more of that, because our frequency at which we're vibrating is so low that, and it's all we can see, because when we're in that place, it's all we see, and therefore we attract more of it. And hence it's a snowball effect. So think of the snowball. It starts with a little kernel. And as it rolls down the mountain, it not only gains in size, but it gains in momentum, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And that's, when phrases like, when it rains, it pours, and all these things come in. So go back to the freight train. If you're in that dire situation, there's no point in someone coming to you saying, be happy, focus on the positive, be grateful for what you have. Because it just, when you're there, you can't. It's too far removed from where you are at that moment. And if you use that analogy, if you were to try to stop a freight train instantly that's going at 100 miles an hour, what would happen? Everybody in the train would probably die, because the train would smash into a million pieces. It can't. It's not possible. So what do? The first thing is we need to slow down that train. So it doesn't mean be grateful for everything and focus on the positive. It means start to neutralize wherever you can. So if you're so low and so difficult and then just impossible situations, then tiny little things, like 5 minutes a day, just whatever you do, like if you have a pet that you love or something, this is where mindfulness comes in. Just sit and try to be still and stroke your pet for 5 minutes a day, just to slow your mind, because what we're doing is we raise the vibration in slowing down those negative thoughts. We can't turn them to positive thoughts right away, but we can slow down the negative. And, if you don't have that, or you don't live by the ocean and love the water, then maybe there's just an air conditioner in the room and you focus on that sound, or there's some kind of sound around and you just focus on that for 5 minutes. And all that's doing is just slowing down your thoughts. And that's the goal. just to start slowing down. And, do this every day. Maybe the second day it's 6 minutes and then 7 minutes. And just in doing that, you're going to slow down that negativity and begin to level out and start to raise your vibration. As minimal as that sounds, again, depending on your situation, the freight train might take, months, maybe years to stop.
Right.
But we've got to get to a place where we can stop it, and then we can start reversing it and rolling it in the opposite direction.
So a couple of things you said. One, I just want to call back to, you said, we don't see things how they are. We see them how we are. And I think that's such an interesting way to state that, because so much of it is we're going to filter things through our own lens. Our interpretation of the world. I worked for years in the eating disorder realm, and a lot of what we would talk about with people with body image is you are never going to have the same perception of your body as anyone else, because it's always going to be filtered through your bias, subjective interpretation of your body. And so when we think about anything, it's always going to be filtered through our own subjective, biased interpretation of things. And so as you're thinking about this, you're talking about essentially the language I would be using with people is radical acceptance and responsibility. And so we're saying the same thing through two very different languages, but the ultimate piece of realizing we can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control our reactions to it.
Yeah, think of what responsibility means.
Right.
It means the ability to respond.
Right. And that it's not that we're saying you are then, like, I think sometimes it's used negatively of like, well, you're responsible for it, fix it, but also from a sense of an empowerment piece. You don't have to stay stuck there. You get to make a change, which is about reclaiming the power that for years, many people, like in your decade of experiences, my guess is it felt like a sense of powerlessness. The world is happening to me versus I get to control my response to or my space in the universe.
And talk about shame.
Yeah. Because you're thinking that, again, this idea of I am the problem. Also, I have no control in fixing the problem, and the constant dumping. And what you described, basically, I think about this idea of sort of slowing down our brain. I think you hit on something that's really important for many people. You described the snowball effect. Oftentimes when somebody comes in, I have a client that I'm working with right now who's in her 60s, and she's talking about, well, why can't I figure this out? Why can't I fix? I know what to do. So why is it not happening? And a lot of the conversations that we have are about also building self-compassion. You've been doing this, whatever this is for people, likely for, in her case, almost 60 years. A lot of these coping mechanisms, a lot of these views, these beliefs about herself, the world, started when she was a child. So how fair is it to then expect that in a month of doing this work, you're suddenly going to, like you're saying with the freight train example, stop and turn the train around? And so I think for a lot of people, it's also this, gosh, I just really need to get to a place where I'm not suffering so much. And so there's this desperation to stop feeling it, but also I think a fear in making the choice to do it in a way that would actually create meaningful, sustainable change. So what you said of, it's a choice. It's a choice that we get to make. And I really liked what you said about, really, it's about changing. I will change because I can't change the environment around me. I can change my relationship to the environment around me. And for many people, the initial part before we can even begin to shift to neutral to positive is one, what you said, which is slowing the inputs. So for 5 minutes a day, your brain still might say that you're a giant piece of garbage the whole 5 minutes. We're just turning off the inputs to not give you new data to suggest it. So we're just not going to go search for it somewhere else. We're still here. We're just stopping the input for a while. And then the second part, and I think this is where maybe you and I do a lot of work with our clients, is often building that capacity to validate and to really move through some of those feelings. Because oftentimes I feel like they haven't given themselves the opportunity to feel their feelings fully, to then even have the chance to neutralize their relationships with them, to then shift how they're engaging in the world around them.
I think so many things again. Why do we want change of any kind? Why do we want anything at all? We want anything and everything because how we believe it will make us feel when we have it. Right? Why do we want a certain relationship because of how we believe it'll make us feel. Why do we want more money? Why do we want this job? Why do we want, the car? Because of how we believe it will make us feel. And therein lies the key. Our feelings are our compass as to how we are doing energetically. So when going back to the law of attraction, and it's a beautiful thing because it's innate, it's built in. We all have an innate guidance system, and it is our feelings. And so when we are feeling poorly, any type of negative emotion, depressed, angry, frustrated, sad, bitter, you name it, we know we are vibrating at a low frequency and therefore are going to keep attracting those types of experiences. So our emotions are the key to pay attention to. And, to what you said before, absolutely. If your client is in her 60s, she's been running a pattern probably for 60 years. And what I really want to touch on at that point as well is often people who, and I can say that because I'm one of them, and I'm guessing you probably are too. In your client,
sure I am. Too. Yeah.
We were sort of would often describe ourselves as empaths, right? So people who end up in negative patterns and with unhealthy belief systems, unhealthy patterns, often toxic environments, whether it's relationships or workplaces, etc., are empaths. And empathy is very often described as a really good positive quality. And I always thought that and believed it too. But in doing all this work I've been doing and learning everything and studying and just on my evolution journey, I'm going to say something really controversial here. I'm going to just put it out there.
I'm ready.
Empathy is actually really bad. Because when we talk about it from a law of attraction and from an energetic point of view, think about what it is. When you have empathy for someone, let's just take, you see an abused animal lying on the street and you're empathetic. You go, oh my goodness, that's the most awful thing. And you lower your emotions and your vibration to that to match the animals. You put yourself in the situation of that animal or person or situation, whatever you want to call it. But all you're doing is lowering your vibration to match theirs. And who does that help?
Right.
It doesn't help them because they've now attracted lower, right? Because they're vibrating. And you're worse off than when you started. So empathy doesn't benefit anybody. Compassion, on the other hand, means you can have compassion for others and other people's situations, but you're so in tune with your own inner being and your core that you don't lower your vibration to meet theirs. So you can have compassion for someone without lowering your vibration. And then what does that do? Well, for one, you're staying up here. So you're ensuring that you're not attracting things that are at a lower frequency. You're keeping your frequency because you've practiced it and you're so in tune with it that nothing can bring you down. So now you're here. That's compassion. And it can't bring you down to this level. But if for whatever reason you need to or choose to stay in the same situation as the people or the situation that's more negative, what you might do, there's a possibility that you might begin to help raise their vibration to move towards yours because you are so strongly embedded and situated in your high frequency that is so much more powerful than low frequency. So you have the potential to raise others' frequency, and then everybody benefits. So there's energetically such a massive difference between empathy and compassion. And I came up with this, think of it as a triangle. And I know we're not going to use video, but if people can just visualize a triangle. And on the low corner of the triangle, you have empathy. And then this comes into when people say, well, opposites attract, I'm opposites. And this is a big thing. And yes, opposites attract. Well, here's my theory on opposites attract. So the triangle, and at the low corner, you have empathy. And the opposite of that is apathy. But vibrationally, they are the same. And that's why empaths end up with narcissists, and narcissists seek out empaths, because they may be opposite in terms of behaviors, but vibrationally, they are the same. Hence the law of attraction. You are attracting the same. So from an outer level, it appears that you're attracting the opposite to you, but vibrationally, you're attracting the same to you. And the goal then, going back to the triangle, is to move up the triangle, and at the peak being compassion, right? When you're then so in tune with yours that nothing. And as you move up the triangle or the ladder, or however you want to visualize it, you will then attract, or the opposite parts will become less and less and less. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
As you move up this triangle.
Yeah.
So that's my theory visualized when we talk about the law of attraction, and people say, well, opposites attract. And I said, well, yes, but no.
Yeah.
It appears that way, but energetically it's the same. And again, I say this because I spent my life in toxic relationships, and I never understood it. I was like, I'm such a good person. I'm always trying to do the right thing. I do that. Why am I getting that? And I just never understood the law of attraction or energies or frequencies or any of it.
Yeah.
And I ended up very much in the victim mentality. And again, this is not to shame anyone. I've been there. I was it, but it's why it comes back to, we have to make a choice and take responsibility.
I mean, when you were describing this too, it started to make me think a lot about many people that either are defining themselves or have been defined by other people as empathetic or as empaths, oftentimes struggle with codependency and enmeshment. And I think that's really kind of what we're getting at is, for many of us, we are incredibly empathetic, and that empathy often sometimes is enmeshed with our shame. Because it's this idea of, I have to take care of it. I have to be the person that can do anything for anyone, that's always the yes person, that is always willing to help, because that's also where I derive my sense of worth and value. So it sets us up to then develop these very unhealthy codependent relationships where we basically define ourselves by how well we're doing to take care of other people. So I think by your example, that's this idea of, I'm lowering my energy to get to whatever place it is that I need to do to help someone. And so I think the idea of having compassion, it makes so much sense to me. I'm sure you're right. There's gonna be a lot of people that are like, fuck that. Empathy is the most important thing. We need more empathy. But I even think about a lot of the things that are going on in the world, regardless of when people are listening to this, there's always going to be some sort of major trauma, major events that are happening. A lot of the times I think our reactions to it, when they come from a place of kind of, oh my goodness, that's so overwhelming. Sometimes what ends up happening is people inadvertently make it about them and their pain and suffering, as opposed to, what can I do to elevate the experience for everyone, or for that other being. And so I can see it. Like, it's the first time someone said it. So I'm like kind of allowing myself to process it, but I can see exactly what you mean, because I think there's this concept of, how do we, when we're in a space, if we are at the higher frequency or at that higher vibration, how do we not lose that? How do we kind of offer that as a way to lift somebody else up? I think the really tricky part is, and again, this is where I think it's more than just like you said, it's the basic concept is simple. The implication, or the implementation, yes, is not. Is that sometimes there's also the layer of resentment that comes in, which is, well, fuck, I've been taking care of everybody my whole life, and I'm sick of being the one that's always got to lift somebody up. So then you're either lowering yourself out of that state of, oh my goodness, that's so overwhelming, or you're lowering yourself in the state of resentment. You've reached a peak point where you burn out, and then you drop and you plummet, and you're depressed, you're resentful, you're overwhelmed, and that also lowers you. And then I think that sort of cycle, at least for me, that's where I find myself. As I come out of it, things are great. There's always a hole. There's like risk factors to when some of those other things happen. I pivot, And then often when I pivot, I become resentful. And I've joked with my husband about this. I'm like, I reach a point where all I want you to tell me is that my life is the hardest life anyone's ever had to live. I have the hardest life. Things are most terrible for me. I know up here, logically, that's not true. I am incredibly privileged, but I need someone to say that because I feel that low. And I can now witness, having done a lot of the work, before I was aware of it, the effect it was happening. I mean, now I have the mirror of my 4.5-year-old. When I'm in a shit place, I mean, she will get there faster than anyone else. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not what I want.
Yeah.
So when I can get to a higher frequency, I can then hold space for her when she's lower and help her get back up there. But that, again, this is still a process I'm working through. But I think I'm ping-ponging the same as you. But that's a lot of what's happening in my brain, kind of thinking through all those pieces too.
I love that you mentioned your daughter, because kids, young kids, up until the age of max sort of 7, and I'll explain why, but so kids and animals, especially like dogs generally as our pets, but are an amazing mirror because they will always reflect us, essentially, to us. So when they're throwing a tantrum, it means something is off with us. And that is because when animals, it's why dogs don't live so long, because they are so in tune with their inner being. They don't feel guilt or shame or any of these emotions that we do. We often, when they look at you like this, we think, they feel guilty. That's us projecting onto it. They don't know guilt. They have an associative learning brain, and they have basically a 2-minute memory. So if they tore up your house and you come back an hour later and then and they look at you like they don't know what you're talking about. They don't remember they did it.
Yeah.
They don't carry it. That's why they're an amazing example of mindfulness and living in the moment and being present. And they will always reflect our state of being because they are so in tune with theirs. And young children are the same. So think about it. When we're born, every baby believes the world revolves around them, and it does, right? They poop, wipe my butt. They cry. They don't care if it's the middle of the night and you're sleeping. They don't care.
Right.
It's like they expect to be serviced and loved and coddled and wondered, and rightly so, because they are completely aligned with their inner being.
Yeah.
But then, of course, as life and society and the world, and this is why I say until about the age of 7, because a child, the babies live in, they're in theta and delta. That's why they sleep so much, if we want to talk about brainwaves, etc. But fast forward a little bit, children basically live in the emotional state until the ages of about 7 to 9. That's when logic begins to develop in the brain. And that's why there's no point in trying to have a rational conversation.
Right, with my 4-year-old.
Because they have no logic. It hasn't developed in their brain. But this is why there's such a beautiful reflection of their surroundings, because all they have is their emotions. But for better or for worse, it's also during this time that we create certain beliefs about ourselves. Why? And this comes back to why we have patterns in going back to your 60-year-old client. And you said it probably forms in childhood. I would argue all, if not all, then really, really almost all of our negative patterns are formed in early childhood. Because what happens when we don't get the love and the care and the nurturing and the safety and the security that we need as babies and as young children, because our very survival depends on our caregivers, on our parents or other caregivers. I mean, a baby will die without a caregiver.
Right.
So it's an innate survival. They need them to survive. And when we don't get our basic needs met, so think of Maslow's triangle, with the baby begins to form beliefs. It's like, well, if a baby is never held or never given love, well, I'm unlovable.
Right.
Or I'm unworthy. I don't deserve it. I'm not enough. And then begins to create behaviors in an attempt to get that love or safety or security or whatever it is that's missing. Often
the performance self.
Of them.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. So I'm a hypnotherapist as well. And this is why when people do struggle to shift their mindset around a certain issue, let's say toxic relationships. And again, I speak that because that was a big one for me. What we can do in hypnotherapy is go back and find the root's cause. So the how, why, when, and where exactly that belief was created, and we can reform it within your subconscious. So reform, elevate, and transform it within your subconscious to help with the mindset shift process. And so going back to, we form these behaviors to try and get that need filled. There are always 4 roles that people take on. So once I tell you this, you're going to start looking in your own family, but also in other families. And I promise you're going to see it. So for all the listeners. So there are 4 roles. It's the overachiever, it's the rebel, the carer, and the sick. So there'll always be, when an environment is not well-rounded and healthy, people in the family take on one of those 4 roles. And so let's say the mother is the carer and the father is the overachiever and the first child is the rebel. The 4th child is going to be the sick because it's the only role left. And all these roles are created in an attempt to get the needs met, whether that's attention, affection, love, security, safety, you name it, what have you. And it's just fascinating when you look at your own family and when you look around. I promise you'll be able to see these roles. And the roles can shift over time. But the point is that all of these behaviors are forms of codependence because we look for someone, in this case early on, external, for validation, because we've created this belief of, ultimately underlying all the beliefs is that I am not enough.
Yeah.
So underlying, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm undeserving, is I am not enough. That's the underlying belief of everything. And we create these behaviors. And then what happens is they become, because again, as children, we are dependent, our survival is dependent on our caregivers. And we form these beliefs and we create these behaviors and we carry them on so often that they're just part of our subconscious, because 95% of how we operate is operated by our subconscious. We're really only 5% conscious as we move through the day. And so as we go into adulthood, we continue these behaviors subconsciously. We're not really aware that we're doing it or that we even have these beliefs, but we continue them because they're so ingrained in us and because it's the only thing we've ever known. And so even though we then are, as adults, are no longer dependent on our caregivers or parents or whoever is looking after us, we don't change our behavior because most people aren't aware of it. And so this is why you so often see and hear, oh, the person married someone just like their mother or just like their father, or the family situation ends up so similar to the one they grew up in. And this is because it's the only environment, it's the only thing you've ever known. And our mind dislikes change. Our mind will always take us to what's familiar. And this is why to change is simple, but not easy. Because essentially we're undoing beliefs and habits and patterns and behaviors that we've run for, going back to your client, probably 60 plus years, you know? And so it's unrealistic to expect that to just change overnight and all of a sudden for life to be a bed of roses. And this comes back to making a choice to change and taking the responsibility to saying, I am going to change. Because at the end of the day, we cannot control anybody else. And to your point before, you said when bad things happen, going back to the compassion, it was so interesting because you said, how can I uplift them? Almost like it was a compulsion that you have to, no matter what. But this is the thing. Whether you do or don't is not in your control, because you don't control how other people respond. You may find ways to, you may know exactly how to help them, but if they are not willing to change, there's nothing you can do about it. And so you're looking for validation, right? You're looking for validation. It's codependence. And whether
100%.
It's whether it's from people or substances or food, or it's everything is a form of codependence. right? We're looking for food, for comfort. We're looking to alcohol, to cigarettes, to drugs. It's all forms of codependence feeding this underlying belief of I am not enough, which is what we need to address. But you cannot ultimately control, we cannot, nobody can control anybody other than themselves. The only person that we have any kind of control over is ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting for people to think about is that at the goal of what we're talking about is really one, starting to get clear on what some of those patterns are in our life and looking at them from a place of curiosity rather than judgment. And that's really difficult when your norm, might not even be aware that that is maladaptive or unhealthy or not
Yeah.
supporting you because it's all you know. And so I think for many people, the thing we haven't talked about, at least directly, is the idea that then also making the choice is a conscious decision to walk into the fear of the unknown, which, you mentioned our brain not wanting to make a change. One of the things then is, I used to coin it as the predictable shittiness. I would rather live in this predictably shitty circumstance because I can count on, I know what's going to happen. I don't like what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I will complain and bitch and say that I want things to be different. And that's that piece I think you talked about of everybody wants the change, but the choice looks different. And I think that's the thing is then going, but then I have to figure out how to tolerate the distress of being in the state of unknown to allow the possibility that something could be better than what I have right
Mm-hmm.
now. And if at your core, you believe you're not enough, and this is what you've developed to function in the world to at least have some artificial sense of enoughness, you're not often willing to roll the dice to try for something different. And so really a lot of this is understanding why, again, you can't walk into one hypnotherapy session, one coaching session, even a year of therapy and be like, well, this better be better. It's going, I have so much insight to build to understand how my brain functions and the patterning that's in it. Like you said, so much of this is habit, to then recognize where are the barriers to change going to exist and what do I need to address these different barriers. The biggest thing for me, as you said it, and part of me wanted to throat punch you for calling out that it was codependence because I was like, fuck yeah, I know it is, but I don't want it to be. I hate this because it's this very sticky, it's like
Yeah.
I've done 96% of the journey and I've got about 4% left. And that 4% is so sticky and murky. And it's this idea still of, but I can, so I should. And I'm learning how to love people when they don't change. That tolerance has gotten there, but I still feel a responsibility. And I think a lot of that is releasing. If I am not doing something for other people, I haven't yet established enough of a trust that I am worthy and enough, which is why I think many people like me struggle with their kids and develop unhealthy relationships with their kids because your kids do need you. So then you get this very unhealthy, you've got to be perfect and do everything for them. And if you can't, you're basically shame yo-yoing all the time.
But think about it. When you are better, right? When you are selfish and focus on yourself first,
right?
Then you are better for your kids because you're more patient, you have more time, you have everything is better. You're setting an example for them that they follow because we live what we learn and we learn what we live, right? We picked up these patterns from our parents. And until someone, one generation has to break the cycle because otherwise it does continue. It has to. It can't be any other way. It perpetuates.
Again, we said this in the beginning. We could talk for like 7 hours. But one of the things I'm thinking a lot about is we have sufficiently, I think I always talk about it as your brain pond. People come in, their brain pond is calm. They're functioning even if they're not happy with it. And they're there. We've mucked everything up. People are probably, my guess is exactly like you predicted. They're thinking about probably, am I the overachiever, the rebel, the carer, the sick? What does all this dynamic look like? How is it happening in my other relationships? But I think a lot too then about, okay, so if you are going to break the cycle, I'm going to make that change. I'm going to make this choice. I'm going to shift out of these patterns. Many of the relationships people are in at that time are likely going to be things they attracted during those lower frequencies. So what do they do? Like, let's say that there is an interaction with somebody and they are like, okay, I'm not going to go here anymore. I'm no longer going to tolerate that. Is there something that could kind of be in their pocket to help them then when they're having that interaction with, let's say, a family member, a close friend who's now pulling them, and not that they are responsible, but we make the choice to fall down, but like there is a pull to go back to that frequency.
Yeah.
What do we do in that moment? And is there anything because we can't control them. I hear you saying that. I'm mostly saying that again for me because, but.
Yeah. And so so many things come to mind. One, I just want to go back to, I love that you talked about the unknown, because it is the only place that we can create from. Because if you want a future that is different to your past, you have to do something different. But if you wake up thinking the same thoughts, doing the same things, running the same routine, then your future will be the same as your past. It has to be. The only place we can create something new from is the unknown. And this is where we tap into the fears that you also mentioned, right? And this comes down to when we realize that we've attracted certain, probably a lot of the relationships in our life at a certain frequency, then if we want something different, there's a good chance, doesn't have to be, but there's a good chance that a few, maybe a lot of those relationships will fall away. And that taps into our deep-seated fears of the fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. And this comes back to, especially with empaths, is the survival, right? And because if you go back historically in humanity, people couldn't survive on their own. We needed to live in tribes. And that's still somewhere in our DNA. And the fear of being alone and the fear of rejection and the fear of abandonment is, for many people, worse than staying in the shitty situation that they're in, no matter how shitty it is, because it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? That's where that comes from. And you may not like it, but it's predictable. And man, do we love predictability, because we find security in that. This comes back to your emotions are your guidance system. And so if you are not feeling good and joy and happy and positive and excited, that is your inner being telling you you are out of alignment. And this is where, you can call it blind faith, you can call it trust, you can call it, whatever. But there's a big part of that plays a role, that has to play a role in changing, because life will be different. And that's what you want, right? You want life to be different. But the people, to answer your question, what can they do in that moment when they're pulled back? Yeah, a lot of people, if you've been an empath serving everyone around you your whole life, and all of a sudden you go, sorry, not today, they're not going to like that. If you're in a narcissistic relationship, as I was, everything is about them, right? And you all of a sudden go, they are going to do everything in their power to keep you there, because you serve them. And, is there an easy solution? If there is, I haven't come across it yet. It comes back to that point that I said originally. It's a choice and responsibility. No matter how scary, no matter how difficult, it starts with the choice.
I'm having a dual experience. One, I don't want to wrap this up, but two, I know we need to wrap it up. And so I'm also just thinking about, for people as they hear that piece, again, we've come full circle on a couple things. One, I think really coming back to this idea that at the end of the day, it's a choice. And it's a choice that does require vulnerability and risk. And there is a chance that things won't work out. But the likelihood that things won't work out is a much lower percentage than the reality that what's currently happening isn't working. And I think we lose sight of that. And so really recognizing that the only way to allow for something greater is to allow the possibility that we can do this unknown thing or make this change.
I spent so much of my life in really, really toxic relationships that almost killed me. And yeah, leaving was scary. And they did try to pull me back and keep me there and keep me stuck. And I had all the fears, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being alone. And today, so I am not married and I don't have children. And at this stage, it's probably never going to happen, right? So is that a good or a bad outcome? Not what I would have wanted by choice, right? But it is. And let me tell you, where I am today, I have peace. So whilst I am alone, and I believe, as I keep raising my vibration as I go, that I will attract what I actually want, right? and deserve into my life, because as I've gone, obviously I've dated and the pattern, I am going up, right? So whilst I'm not where I want to be, I know I'm on my way. But in the meantime, being alone, and again, there's so much judgment around, I'm 43 now and, single with no kids. And there's a lot of judgment that comes from the outside world as to what that means about you, as in me. I am alone, but I very rarely feel lonely. And when I was in those negative relationships, I felt lonely all the time. And I would take peace and being alone over loneliness and abuse and depression and frustration and burnout and anger and exhaustion and illness. I don't have everything I want yet, but I wouldn't trade what I have today ever for one day going back just to have somebody.
Right.
Does that make sense? And so I really just want to share that, very personal to me, put it out there, because the fear of being alone is so scary for a lot of people. But the peace that you can attain with that trumps everything else, I promise you.
For many people, as you're all thinking about this, it's when you talked about having to let go of maybe a lot of relationships that we have. I think about people in AA or in other recovery programs where a lot of the times it's you can't associate with anybody that you associated with during that time. And I think a lot of it is really, maybe they're not talking about frequencies and vibration, but it's again around, you will attract the people that will then co-create the life that you're going to have. And so for a lot of us, it's making these tough decisions. And it isn't just in our relationships. I think about a lot of my clients right now that are struggling in jobs where they're afraid of being laid off. They're afraid of what it would mean if they took an hour to go to the gym once or twice a week, and they can't afford to do that, or they can't afford to leave. Now they're paying for aftercare for their kids because they have to work even longer. And a lot of the conversations we have of, gosh, if that's where you're at, what's being communicated to me is that you are not valuable as a person. You are valuable as basically a robot that's going to give everything, and they're going to look for a reason to let you go no matter what, is what you're describing to me. And so we need to make the decision of, is it worth eroding more of yourself to get the check mark of, well, you're not fired yet, but keep going. And so I think for many of us, it's realizing that these patterns show up on the work side as well. And so I know we've given people so many things, so many little nuggets that they're probably already kind of like, all right, this is in my pocket. I've got my next step. But just to come back full circle, if you were to leave people with one thing, if they're listening to this, and again, listeners, remember, we're not meant to take everything out of one listen. Come back, listen to this again, kind of pause it when you get to the spot that's resonating with you most. But if you were just to give people an invitation of, here's the one thing maybe to start with, or to take in as that nugget to begin this work, what is that next step for them?
It's the choice, right? The choice is the first step. And so what can help you make the choice? Because at the end of the day, only you can make it. Nobody can make that choice for you. Everybody can judge you, can shame you. Nobody can make the choice. Only you can decide what it's worth and what you really want, and to make that choice. And so to help make that choice, this is what I would say. It's going back to the unknown. Like, if you want, so let's take the situation of the job, right? Well, how do you feel? Our feelings are our guidance system of how aligned we are with our inner being. And how are you feeling being in that job where you're afraid of getting fired every day? How is that serving you? How is it serving your family? The biggest driver subconsciously is probably, well, I need the paycheck. But what is that paycheck costing? And if you want your situation is not going to change by staying there. That's a given. It's not going to change by staying there. So if you want something different, it has to be unknown. And so whilst it's scary, it can also be exciting, because the very definition of unknown is you don't know. You don't know how the next thing is going to come. You don't know how beautiful it's going to be. You don't know what's going to happen. But in order to create possibility for something different, you have to make space for it. Mm-hmm. There's no space for another job when you're in this job. There's no space for another relationship when you're in this one. It's about releasing.
Yeah. And I think that piece of realizing that when you say choice and coming back to what do you need to make the choice, and I think in that it might even be for you all listening and sometimes you might not have those things or the commitment or the willingness or the drive or motivation or whatever word you want to put down to make the choice today. Sometimes I think it's also then owning I'm making the choice right now to not change. And sometimes that piece also, it feels like we're saying, well, then you're fucking up. That's not what we're saying.
No.
It's reframing it to a sense of empowerment and that you also get to reserve the right to make a different choice when you want to. And so we're not going to continue to be powerless in that because that is going to, again, kind of keep you stuck in those lower frequencies and codependent and enmeshed with these relationships, roles, other unhealthy pieces. And so, okay, Veronica, there's been, again, like 7,000 little wisdom pieces and next steps. And I think we've done a sufficient job of just, like I said, kind of mucking everything up. So people are like, fuck, I probably wasn't ready for that. Now I got to go to work or I got to go make dinner. And I'm like, just all I'm thinking about is what role I played and everyone around me. And so if people are like, okay, I found my person. I need to go. I need to meet with Veronica stat. I need to go. I'm ready to make the choice. I want to do this now and I want to do this work with her. Where is the best place for them to find you and to begin that next step of that deeper work?
My website. So it's www.revivalhealth.ch because I'm located in Switzerland. And that has all the information about my services. There's a contact page as well. So you can send me a message there.
Perfect.
Any day. I write a lot. So I publish on medium.com, but they're also on my website. If any of these particular topics have really sort of rung bells, you'll probably find an article on it somewhere on my website.
I love that. And so for people, if you're kind of like, I think this might be what I want and I'm still kind of like teetering, then check out some of those articles, do a little bit more of a dive on some of these. I think one of the things that's so cool is as you were talking, probably at least 10 times, I was like, oh my gosh, we're saying the same thing, but using a different language. And I think that's such a powerful piece because a lot of the times I feel like I have to remind people that most people that are working in these fields, well, I shouldn't say that. A significant portion of us working in these fields are doing a lot of the same things, but through a different language and skill set. And so it's finding the people that you trust that know what they're talking about. That's step one. But then once you find that, realizing, gosh, I might know what I'm talking about and still not be the right fit for you. Because the way that I might phrase it, I mean, some of what you said today, I'm resonating more with what you said than what I tell myself, so even realizing, oh, that hits so different for me.
Yeah.
And it helps me see these things in a different way. And so I think listeners just being open to that idea of, again, there's so many different people out there offering different pieces. Mm-hmm. I think the key realizing, are they promoting fast, easy solutions with quick fixes? Or are they saying, no, this is a simple process and the work is going to be really hard and I can do it with you so you don't have to be alone. And I think that is the gift of what Veronica offers is I'm going to empower you that you can do this. I'm going to walk alongside of you and I know how to help you do that. So those really tough steps, you aren't walking it alone and we can do this together. And so all of us, we're just going to take a moment. Remember, I always invite you after you first listen to this, just like let it sit and then you come back and you take your next step. Right now, we're just letting it kind of percolate in our brain and see what sticks. When you're ready, you'll be able to reach out to Veronica. Veronica, thank you. This has been incredible. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us so much. This has been amazing. And for everyone else, we will see you back here next Sunday.